All right, so for this game, it looks like we have kind of a sequential setup. So we do have these 5 crops that are going to be planted one at a time consecutively. So we'll set it up accordingly. We have these 5 slots to work with, but we also have to keep track of 2 different things. We have to keep track of the crop that's going to be planted, but also whether it's going to be irrigated or fertilized. So what we'll do is we'll set this up as a 2-tiered game to keep track of those 2 components independently. Now, the elements themselves, we have O, P, R, S, V. So we have the 5. And yeah, as we said, that each one is going to be either I or F. And we don't have any numbers, unfortunately. We don't know how many are going to be irrigated or fertilized, but I guess that's part of the game. So let's take a look at the rule. So the first rule tells us that we essentially cannot have 2 consecutive fertilized crops. So I guess we can say something like, you're not allowed to have 2 Fs in a row. Next, we are told that O has to go after S, but at the same time before R. So we can set it up as kind of S-O-R accordingly. Next, if P is not in 3, then they have to be fertilized. Now, these kinds of rules, they should kind of be a familiar pattern. Anytime you see a rule that says that if we don't have this, then you must have that, that essentially creates an inclusive relationship of sorts. And the common sense way that you want to interpret that statement is essentially that you'll have to have either this or that. Anytime you say something like, if you don't have this, then you're going to have that, that basically translates into saying that you have to have one of those 2 things. So here, we essentially can retranslate this rule to simply say that P either has to go into 3, or alternatively, P has to be fertilized. Next, if V is before R, then O is fertilized. So if we have V before R, then I guess we have to have O be fertilized. We could contrapose this, but actually, yeah, let's do that. We can say that if we don't have O fertilized, then I suppose we'll have to have an R before the V. Now, in terms of exhaustion, it doesn't seem like we can do much with this. I mean, the last rule is conditional. If we have that, it doesn't really let us do all that much. The most restrictive part of the game is probably this SOR range, but I mean, there's plenty of flexibility there. So you know what, let's take a look at the questions themselves. So the first question here is our standard exclusion question, which as usual, we do by the rules. So the first rule is that we can't have 2 Fs in a row. Answer choice A looks okay, B looks okay as well, C looks fine, D looks fine, E, we have a whole bunch of F's in a row, so that's certainly not going to work, so we can get rid of answer choice E. Next, we have to have that range of S before O before R, so let's take a look. Answer choice A looks okay, B looks... oh, no, that doesn't work. Answer choice B has R before O, we can get rid of that. Next, C is good and D is good. Next, we said P3 or P fertilized essentially is that next rule. So let's take a look. Answer choice A has P in third, we're fine. Answer choice C, P is neither fertilized nor third, so we can get rid of that. And answer choice D, P is third, so that's fine. And lastly, if we have V before R, so between answer choices A and D, that would look like it applies to answer choice D where we do have V before R, well then O is supposed to be fertilized, and it's not. So we can get rid of answer choice D, and that leaves us with answer choice A as the best answer to question number 12. And as usual, let's just quickly plug that into the board. So we have SOPRV. And between these, only the second one is fertilized. So let's take a look at the local question. So the first one here is question number 13, which says, if V goes second, well, let's see what we can do with that. So if we have V in the second position, what does that effectively tell us? And I suppose we could play on this last rule, because if V is before R, but the thing is, if V is second, it's going to have to be before R, because R is way later. It has to go after S and O. So I suppose in this scenario, O is definitely going to be fertilized. What can we do with that? Now, we know that I suppose O is going to have to go between S and R, so at the moment that means really either 3 or 4. Although depending on where you put it, if you put it into 3, then it would affect P. So you know what we could do? It doesn't seem like we have much more to go on, so let's just split scenarios. We can say that either we're going to have O over here fertilized, or you're going to have O over there fertilized. Now, in the top scenario, we know that P is not third, so it's going to have to be fertilized. But if P is going to have to be fertilized, it would have to be, well, I suppose it could go either first. Oh, no, it can't. There's no way to put P into 1 because S has to go before O. In fact, we can plug that in. So S is going to be locked into this position. So if P is fertilized, it's going to have to go into 5 because we can't have two Fs next to each other. So P is definitely going to be over here, and then R is going to be over there. And all of these guys have to be irrigated. S could still go either way, though. All right, cool. What about the bottom scenario? In the bottom scenario, we know that, well, I guess O has to go before R, so that would force R to go there, and obviously 3 and 5 will have to be irrigated. Now, in terms of P could still go third, or P could be fertilized in the first position still, right? Because we could do SOR with the S over here, so we have a little bit more flexibility. Okay, let's take a look. The question asks, which of the following now would have to be true? A, P is before O, and no, because we could have had P over here. Answer choice B, V is before P. Does that have to? Well, no, because we said P could have also gone over there, so that doesn't have to be true. Answer choice C, V is irrigated. Not quite necessarily, because over here, V maybe could have been fertilized. Answer choice D, exactly one of the last two crops is fertilized. And actually, yeah, no matter what, you'll notice that exactly one of the last two would have been fertilized. The best answer to question number 13 is D. Next, question number 14. If sunflowers are third, well, let's take a look. If we have S in the third position, well, that's kind of nice because O and R get locked into place. So we know that O and R will go here and there. And we also know that P is definitely going to have to be fertilized right now because it's not third. Oh, and we also know that V is definitely going to be before R, so O has to be fertilized. So that's kind of nice. Oh, but actually, yeah, so 3 and 5 would have to be irrigated. I suppose P could still go into either 1 or 2. We still have a little bit of flexibility there. So let's take a look. The question asks, which of the following now could be true? Answer choice A, O, R before V. Could we have O before? And no, because O is way later and there's no space for V to go after. B, V is earlier than P. Arguably, V and P could shuffle between 1 and 2 right now, so B looks pretty good. Just in case, let's take a look at the rest. Could we have R be fertilized? And no, it's irrigated. Could we have sunflowers fertilized? No, they're irrigated. Can we have V be fertilized? And no, because if V was fertilized, I mean, V and P have to be next to each other, and we already know that P is fertilized, so there's no way for V to be as well. So the best answer to question number 14 is B. Next, question number 15. If V goes third, well, let's take a look once again. If we have V in the third position, what does that tell us? Well, first of all, we know that P is not third, so P is definitely going to have to be fertilized right now. I suppose this last rule also kicks in too, doesn't it? Because there's no way to put R earlier. There's no way R could go into 1 or 2 because it has to go after those guys, right? So V will have to be before R right now, which means O will also have to be fertilized. So that much is true. Now, you could try to do the rest of this mentally. I suppose we know that O would have to go either into 4 or 2. And it might influence some other things, but that might be a little bit daunting. So what you could do is we could split scenarios once again. Worst case scenario, if you try to do it mentally and it doesn't, get you enough, then you can always split scenarios and go from there. So we can do is we know that O essentially has to go into either 2 or 4 because it has to go after S before R. So we can kind of run that and see what happens. Now, in the top scenario, S is obviously first. Bottom scenario, R would then have to go into 5. We know that everything next to the fertilized crops have to be irrigated. And otherwise, top scenario, I guess P and R can still shuffle between 4 and 5. So we can even leave a reminder here. And P is, of course, fertilized. Oh, and I suppose we know that R would have to be irrigated here because they can't be fertilized next to each other. In the bottom scenario, I suppose the same thing happens with S and P, doesn't it? Because they can really go either way. So we'll have P splitting with S being irrigated and P being fertilized. All right, let's take a look. The question asks, which of the following could happen? Answer choice A, O is irrigated, definitely not. Answer choice B, R is fourth. And maybe, top scenario, that actually seems like it might be viable. Let's hold on to B. Just in case, R is fertilized, and no, in both of these scenarios, R would not have been fertilized. Sunflowers are fertilized, and same thing, in both of these scenarios, sunflowers would not have been fertilized. Answer choice E, 3 crops consecutively are irrigated. And no, there's not really any way to do that. In fact, in general, the only way to really have 3 consecutive irrigated crops is for them to go into 2, 3, and 4. Well, actually, I should clarify. The only way to have 3 consecutive irrigated crops while the other 2 are fertilized is if they went into 2, 3, and 4. But obviously, it's not going to happen here because one of these 2 would have to be fertilized. So either way, best answer to question 15 is B. Next, question number 16 is global. We'll come back to this one in a second. Let's take a look at question 17. If R is earlier than P, so if we have R before P, I guess the question again is, what does that tell us? Well, we know that before that we'll have to have S and we'll have to have O. So we'll have this whole SORP set up, which means that P is definitely not going to be 3. It has to go after 3 different elements. So P at the very least is going to be fertilized. Can we do more with this? I mean, V could still go before R or not. So we still have a little bit of flexibility there. So you know what? Let's see what we can do. The question asks, what could be true? Maybe this is enough. Answer choice A. O are irrigated and are third. Could we have O be irrigated in the third position? Well, try to do this next bit mentally with me. If we put O here, then you'll have to have R and P follow, but then that would mean that V is going to end up going before R. And if that's true, then O would have had to be fertilized. So there's no way for O to be irrigated and be third. Answer choice B. R is fertilized in 4. Well, no, that definitely wouldn't work because we know that R currently is before P, so they would both be fertilized, and that's not cool. Answer choice C. S is irrigated and second. Could we put S irrigated into 2? Well, if we placed S over here irrigated and O, R, P are going to follow, that actually seems okay, doesn't it? Because, I mean, sure, V is going to go before R, which means that O is going to have to be fertilized, but that's not a big deal. Answer choice C looks okay. Answer choice D, S is fertilized and second. And no, that would have run into an issue because if you do that, if you run S, O, R, P, then V would go before R and then O would have to be fertilized. So S and O would both end up fertilized next to each other, which would not have worked. Answer choice E, V is fertilized in 4. Well, no, because if you put V fertilized in 4, it would have to be next to P, which is also fertilized, right? In fact, P would get forced into the 5th position. And so that definitely would not work. So the best answer to question number 17 is C. Lastly, let's take a look back to the one global question. Which of the following must be true? Answer choice A. The first irrigated crop is not potatoes. So does it have to be true Ooh, that is a curiously worded answer choice. So that doesn't say the first crop. That says the first irrigated crop. So basically, could P be the first irrigated crop that shows up? And actually, no, it couldn't, could it? Because the thing is, the only way for P to be the first irrigated crop is if it was in 3, because otherwise it would definitely be fertilized. But if P was third, there's no way for this to be the first irrigated crop, because if it was the first irrigated crop, then everything before it would have to be fertilized, and you'd have two F's next to each other, which doesn't work. So that does have to be true, doesn't it? Then the first irrigated crop must not be potatoes. Answer choice A is the best answer to question number 16. For the record, let's take a quick look at the other ones. Answer choice B, at least one irrigated crop is before P. Do we have to have an irrigated crop before P? And no, in fact, we've seen P be fertilized potentially in the first position. So we don't have to have an irrigated crop before P. Answer choice B is out. Answer choice C, R is the third irrigated crop. Does I have to be the third irrigated crop? And no, I mean, for one, in this scenario, for example, S could have been fertilized, which means that R would have ended up being the second irrigated crop. So R does not have to be the third irrigated crop. Answer choice D, sunflowers are the first irrigated crop. Does that have to be true? And no, in fact, sunflowers doesn't have to be irrigated at all. In this scenario, for example, S could have easily been fertilized. So that's an easy disqualifier. Answer choice E, no more than one fertilized crop is earlier than V. Does it have to be true that we have no more than one fertilized crop before V? Well, so far that has been true. We've always seen only one fertilized crop before V. But does that have to be true? And no, I mean, for example, if we put V sufficiently late, like in this example over here, where we had V in the last position, arguably, couldn't this have been a fertilized crop just as easily? I mean, it happens to have been an irrigated one in that one that was from the exclusion question, but it didn't have to be. This could have just as easily been a fertilized crop over here. And then this would have worked. This wouldn't have broken anything. So that doesn't have to be true. We could have had more than one fertilized crop before V. So the best answer either way to question number 16 is A. For the record, you also didn't have to go through all the answer choices, because once you can lock down one that you definitely know must be true, that is arguably good enough.